And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another off-season edition of the Assembly Call. I'm your host, Jared Morris, here with Andy Bottoms and Galen Clavio, who is sitting in for Ryan Phillips tonight. We are very excited to be here to discuss the IU coaching search with you. And for those of you who are watching live on YouTube, this is our recording of Assembly Call Radio. So this is a simulcast of our radio recording. And so we record that in 4 different segments, and we actually do the recording with a different software than Google Hangouts. So things may get a little bit awkward as we do those segments and come in and out of them, and you'll get to hear kind of some talk before and in between each segment as we plan what we're going to discuss. But we like to give you this kind of peek behind the curtain with the simulcast here so that we can have you here live and so that everybody can congregate in the chat. And if you go to assemblycall.com/live during the live broadcast, everybody is there chatting and talking about the Hoosiers. And so, and what else is there to talk about right now? But IU and the coaching search. And so let me really quickly welcome in Andy Bottoms and Galen Clavio here before we start the actual radio recording and just say hi to those guys. And if you would, in the chat, let us know that you can hear us. We're still getting all the audio issues worked out with doing it this way. So let me know that you can hear us here before we begin. But Andy, welcome. Any thoughts on the end of that Michigan game that you just watched?
No, I was kind of back and forth on it. They would take a lead and they're down by 6 and fought back. So disappointing. I was always kind of like the way that the Beeline's teams play, and a little bummed they couldn't keep going, especially because I had picked Louisville to beat them, and there was, no benefit for me from a bracket standpoint for Oregon to continue forward. And although I'm getting beat by both of my kids at this point, so general self-respect and all that is really out the window already.
Hey, your focus is predicting the bracket, not like predicting how teams are going to actually do. So
yeah, well, there's a reason for that. So.
And Galen, it's great to have you back on the Assembly Call. Ryan is doing work over at thebiglead.com tonight, so unable to join us. So we're very excited that you were able to step in and lend your insight.
Thank you guys for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. I am not nearly as easygoing about that Michigan loss as Andy seems to be at this point. I had picked Michigan in my knockout pool for this week, and I'm now out of that for good. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
We have Gerb in our chat says Ryan must be gallivanting with a lady friend who is also a UK fan. I'm so glad that is becoming a meme on this show ever since he let us know about that. Well done, Gerb. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. Just like last week, we're going to jump in. I'm going to hit record here over on this other software, and you'll basically hear me do the intro again. This will be our recording for Assembly Call Radio, but obviously we're going to dive in and then analyze the team exactly how we always do. So when there are little brief pauses, that's just because I'm playing the intro and outro music, and unfortunately the way everything's set up, you can't hear that. But trust me, we will be right back momentarily and talking IU basketball with you. So if you guys are ready, we can jump in and get the first segment going. You guys ready? All righty. I will hit the intro music and we'll get going. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, brought to you by HoosierProud.com. Well, it has now been a full week since Indiana fired Tom Crean, and the Hoosiers are still without a coach. And while the rumor mill is abuzz with names and scenarios and unverified stories of coaches' wives browsing Bloomington real estate and wild tales of secret backroom dinner meetings at beloved Kirkwood establishments, the reality is that none of us really has any idea where Indiana is at with its coaching search. We know they are conducting one. We know they've hired a search firm to assist in vetting candidates, but not in identifying candidates. And we know that Steve Alford is the most polarizing name among those believed to be in the running. But who's in the lead? What's the actual shortlist? How many double-check pluses must a candidate have to stay on the shortlist? When might a decision be made? No one has any clue. I mean, say what you will about Fred Glass, but you can't deny this. The man plays his cards close to the vest. So close to the vest, in fact, that his cards are literally woven inside of the vest itself, folded in half 4 times, and wrapped in an X-ray proof coating so as to be concealed until the decision is ready to be announced. In the meantime, we wait patiently, studying and debating the resumes of the candidates and bathing blissfully in the warm water of the Billy Donovan rumors, because even if they don't come through, they've been a glorious distraction from another dadgum NCAA tournament not featuring the Hoosiers. I am your host, Jared Morris, here to discuss the Indiana coaching search and more with you and with Andy Bottoms and our special guest on this week's episode of Assembly Call Radio, Galen Clavio of Crimson Cast. And of course, Andy and I and Ryan Phillips host the Assembly Call IU postgame show and Assembly Call Radio every Friday. And if you can't listen live to our postgame show or to Assembly Call Radio, no worries at all. Just search for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, wherever you will find us. All righty. Well, I will begin this week's show as I begin every post-game show and every episode of Assembly Call Radio, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And this week's banner moment is De'Ron Davis staying committed to Indiana. This is obviously a time of great turmoil for the Indiana basketball program, a lot of uncertainty. You know, who is the coach going to be, what players are staying, what players are going. Obviously, some recruits decided that they were going to reopen their recruitment, a smart decision on their part, by the way. But De'Ron Davis, at least, has stated that he is committed to IU. And this came from Aaron Mattis, sports reporter at 9 News KUSA in Denver, Colorado, who is also an IU graduate. And he tweeted earlier this week, just spoke with De'Ron Davis's high school coach, Danny Fisher. And Davis is committed to IU, wants next coach to value and need him. Certainly IU fans, after the potential and the production that De'Ron showed as a freshman, value him and believe that he is a big part of the future. So it's going to be huge for whoever the next coach is to have a solid building block like De'Ron in place. So that is definitely the Hoosier Proud banner moment. But I also want to add another banner moment, and that is congratulations to the Indiana Hoosiers women's basketball team. They defeated SMU earlier Thursday night, and they advanced to the next round in the women's NIT, the quarterfinal. They will play Sunday at 2 o'clock Eastern time at Assembly Hall against Villanova. So congrats to the IU women's team. Both Indiana basketball teams made the NIT. Thankfully, one team seems to have taken it seriously and decided to go out there and give it their best shot to win this thing. So go IU women's basketball team. We are all behind you. All righty. Well, let me introduce my esteemed co-hosts on this week's episode of Assembly Call Radio. To my left, we have the host of Bracketology.fm and one of the world's undisputed kings of bracketology, according to BracketMatrix.com. He is still savoring the aftertaste of Stan Robinson's remarkable NCAA tournament appearance. He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what was your Bottoms line from the last week in Indiana basketball?
Man, it's been such a long week. I actually forgot about the Stan Robinson thing. I really wish we had, I hope we can dedicate an entire segment to you and I, feeling vindicated about our continued love for him in the face of play on the floor that would suggest that we should be doing anything but supporting, his candidacy is not the right word, but anyway, so that was a good one. I guess, if we're keeping one of those tote boards in terms of like days since an accident. So I think we're at 7 days since any kind of like Harbaugh related hit piece has come out on the athletic department. So that's a positive as we, move forward into the week. But I think it really does seem like it's been an incredibly long week listening to all the rumors, speculation. And the one thing that a lot of it has solidified for me the attention that it's gotten nationally, even though some of it has probably been a little bit uneducated in some facets, is just how important IU is as a basketball entity and how those who have suggested, oh, maybe the program isn't what it once was. I think the attention on the coaching search for me has, kind of verified where I held it in my own mind, at least. And, what I would assume most people listening to this show would say. And I think, just listening to some of the names that are thrown out and all the attention that it continues to get as things kind of stand still, almost waiting for people to figure out what's going to happen here and what domino is going to fall, has been interesting. And on some level, though, I'm kind of ready for it to kind of get some closure and move on to the next phase, which hopefully will come sometime shortly. But for now, it's everybody's kind of getting tied up in the rumors and questions and debating candidates against one another, which I think is what we intend to do for the bulk of the show today.
Absolutely. And to my right, we have a special guest. Yes, Ryan is out tonight. He is covering the Sweet 16 for the Big Lead and desperately working the back channels to secure a position as shot doctor on Mike Woodson's hypothetical IU staff with Larry Brown. But we are excited to welcome the hardest working man on the IU basketball podcasting scene, Galen Clavio of Crimson Cast. Galen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's always a pleasure to come on here.
It is awesome to have you. And, Galen, for your opening statement, I'd like for you to answer this question, because you've interviewed a number of respected voices recently on Crimson Cast. And for those of you listening, if you haven't listened to Galen's recent interviews on Crimson Cast, find Crimson Cast wherever you listen to podcasts. Go to crimsoncast.com. So much terrific insight coming from your feed this week. But you've interviewed lots of beat writers who really understand the ins and outs of the Tom Crean era because they were there every day. And so I don't want to spend any more time beyond this looking back. We want to look forward. But I am curious, now that we have you here, what has been the single most surprising takeaway that you've had from all these conversations?
I think it was probably how many people perceived Tom Crean as kind of maybe overcomplicating the IU job to some degree. A lot of comments from various media members about a lack of organization, with practices or with the way that recruiting was done, or even just the way that he interacted with people on the beat. Everybody talked about how nice of a guy Tom Crean was to the general public, and what a guy, kind of like genuinely kind sort of person that Crean was. But it was pretty unanimous from everybody that I talked to that there was just kind of an element missing from the way he approached this job that kept him from reaching what I think everybody expected to be his full potential. And it was just interesting to hear like the different facets of that coming in from people who covered him and are no longer on the beat, from people who are still on the beat, from student reporters. It was just like, it was fascinating to me to kind of get this more complete picture of the Tom Crean era. And, it was the whole era kind of seems now in retrospect to be a little bit on edge. Not so much that the place was falling apart, but to the point where it was always going to struggle to kind of get over that hump and get to the level that everybody was expecting it to get to.
Yeah. All righty. Well, we have a lot that we're going to cover on this week's episode of Assembly Call Radio. We're going to talk about these Billy Donovan rumors. Is this really a thing? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about if IU fans are underrating or perhaps even overrating how good of a candidate Tony Bennett is. I think we're each going to reveal our current top 5 in terms of preference, and we'll debate some of our biggest differences. All of that and more on this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. Before we move any further, I do want to take a quick second and tell you about our presenting sponsor, HoosierProud.com. If you consider yourself a Hoosier, and not just an IU Hoosier, but someone who is proud to have roots in the great state of Indiana, then you really do need to check out HoosierProud.com, where they offer a line of t-shirts and accessories that are unmatched for anyone who wants a unique, stylish way to display their pride in being a Hoosier. As we've mentioned many times, we move production of our Assembly Call logo t-shirts to Hoosier Proud because they produce high-quality work, care about their customers, and take pride in their Indiana roots like we do. And they're actually putting their money where their mouth is, in a sense, showing their Hoosier pride by donating 10% of their pre-tax revenues to local Indiana charities. So check them out at HoosierProud.com and use the promo code AC to receive a 15% discount on your entire order. That is promo code AC to receive 15% off at HoosierProud.com. All right, this is the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Galen Clavio from Crimson Cast, filling in for Ryan Phillips this week. And we are going to spend the rest of this episode talking about the IU coaching search. And so, guys, let's start at the top, because I think there is obviously a lot of discussion as you move down the list. But I don't think there's really much debate about who the number one target is for Indiana, and that is Billy Donovan.
Brad Stevens.
What did I say about mentioning Brad Stevens on the show?
Sorry. I thought there was lots of other things that we could not mention, and I did not feel like that was one of them.
No, I mean, look, we all know Brad Stevens is not coming. So, yes, he would be the number one candidate, but it's not happening. So Billy Donovan seems like the grand slam hire. I mean, the guy, given his track record, his experience, his relative youth, who would be the best possible option. We've all heard the stories. But I guess the question is, there's a lot of smoke, but is there something there? Do we really think that this is legitimate? Does this have a chance to actually happen? I mean, Galen, what are your current thoughts on this? Is this something that Indiana fans are just kind of using to comfort themselves in the aftermath of a rough season, or could this really be a thing?
I think the responsible thing to say is, no, we're just making this up. It's out of nowhere. But you know what? Now, I actually think there's something to this. I mean, this is not a rumor that popped up like last week. This is a rumor that's been percolating in certain circles since like February. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me if there's nothing to it, that this rumor would have come out of nowhere, and that when asked about it, Billy Donovan, wouldn't have just been like, "What are you talking about? That's the silliest thing I've ever heard," which he's had a chance to do in multiple press conferences when asked and hasn't. And, even more so now, I mean, putting aside the realtor rumors or the secret meeting at Knicks rumors that have, floated through the ethos here, just the fact that it's popped up now on Around the Horn, PTI, and the Dan Patrick Show in a 24-hour period, after we'd been told all weekend by people supposedly in the know that there was no chance that it was going to happen, I feel like there's some smoke here. Now, there's a lot of hurdles to jump through to get this to happen, even if it is a possibility, and who really knows how much of a possibility it actually is. But if you look at the scenario, it's not out of the question to say, hey, Billy Donovan might not be that happy with the situation he's got at Oklahoma City. Most of the people saying that are people who think college basketball is trash and the NBA is the greatest product on the planet. So that may not be the best people to ask on this anyway. Certainly the timing is a weird thing. And the idea that a coach would pull a Bobby Petrino on the college basketball side of things and leave the NBA to go to a college job it seems like a bit of a stretch, but I don't think it's as big of a stretch as people are making it out to be.
I agree with you. And from everything I've heard, and I've, spent a lot of time looking into this and indulging in some of these stories, I agree. I think there's a legitimate chance of this happening. I wouldn't, try to handicap it or put some kind of percentage on it, but it feels like a legitimate thing that's possible. Andy, on the downside, I have seen a lot of Oklahoma City fans complaining about Billy Donovan's rotations and substitutions, which, I mean, I know you'd be excited if he was the coach, but apparently there's just no end in sight to questionable substitution patterns. I'm sorry.
Whatever it takes. I mean, he's just trying to find the right combination of guys to be out there with Westbrook. So it really doesn't matter at that point. I would like to go on record if you need me to just hang out at Knicks until further notice, just to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of what might be going on, I'm willing to do that. Whether my employer would be excited about that, I can't say, but I'm willing to do that. Now, I think, I think some of the, a lot of the same things that Galen said. I think the part that is, kind of unprecedented about it would be the, kind of move from college during the season, what that might look like. I think that's where a lot of people are kind of hung up on. And the thing that if there's one thing to point to that like, maybe this won't happen, I guess that might be it for me more than anything. It's like just the logistics of how that would work. Would he really leave during the season in a key time where you've got to figure out who you're going to keep on the team and recruit? Like, could you really survive without him and even like assemble a staff that would try to run things that time? Like that to me just logistically is the question. But only because it's something that I don't think we've seen before. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't work, but that to me is the biggest, like, how do you get over that hurdle? But yeah, I mean, I think it's, for me, it's kind of gone on too long to think that there's truly nothing there. Is it maybe, a long shot? It's certainly, trying to hit a high bar if that's who you want to go with. But I think that's what people have clamored for. And if this was going to be the move, swing for the fences. And I think going after Donovan to me would definitely signify that that's what they're trying to do. And if they come up short, then they come up short. But I think it's at least an intriguing concept. And as you said, I think one that while most of these other choices, you're probably going to get a pretty wide range of opinions on. I don't know that I've seen a lot of people, whether people think it's possible or not is one thing, but whether people would be excited about it or not, I feel like is pretty unanimous at this point.
When you think back to Fred Glass's comments at the press conference and what he laid out, the goals, the expectations, Billy Donovan is the one guy where you don't have to squint at all to see it happening because he's already done it. I mean, he's won conference titles. He won back-to-back national championships. And I think, we probably take it for granted how obvious this is. I mean, literally, this should be a Grand Slam hire. This would be just unbelievably great for Indiana. Galen, can you summarize real quick, maybe for folks who are listening, curse of knowledge, I don't want to just assume that everybody understands how great of a hire Billy Donovan would be. Can you just summarize his achievements at Florida and why everybody is so kind of titillated by this because of just how accomplished he is?
I mean, look, he won 2 national titles at a football school and then basically came back with a whole different set of personnel and, was in the Elite Eight, I think 3 straight years, out of the last 4 that he was there. He he took his, I think the fourth year he was at Florida, he took a team to the Final Four, took them to the title game. They lost to Mateen Cleaves and Tom Izzo in Michigan State that year. I mean, he has just consistently put an awesome product out on the floor. He's done it, without necessarily having to have the best talent out of high school. He's developed players. He's got his own particular system. His teams have been good both offensively and defensively. I mean, he's, right now I think if he came back to college, he'd be one of with 3 or 4 active coaches that would have multiple national titles that's currently coaching. I mean, even if he was still at Florida, he would be a tremendous get. And I mean, the fact that he also has NBA experience, has that cachet with recruits and with players, just adds to the mystique around the guy. Plus, he's only 52. And if he comes to a place like IU, which cares about basketball a lot more than Florida does, suddenly he's got a program from a resource perspective that would rival Kentucky or North Carolina. And I think that might be the last thing that he really wants, or the big thing that he would really want if he was going to come back to college.
Yeah. I mean, that summed it up well. It would be an unbelievable hire for Indiana. So obviously, again, it's something to be excited about, something to watch. No one's quite sure exactly how much of a chance it has, but I think it has enough that it warrants talking about. So, let's continue to follow that, see how it goes. We will continue talking about the IU coaching search on Assembly Call Radio. We're going to talk a little bit about Tony Bennett coming up next, because he's a bit of a polarizing figure among IU fans. That's coming up on Assembly Call Radio. Stick with us. All right. Excellent. Let me listen to that real super quick just to make sure we all came through. Excellent. Okay, we all came through. So I'm thinking my plan for this next segment, how long was that? So that's the longest segment we've ever done. That was 18 minutes and 12 seconds.
Sorry, it's my fault.
No, it's definitely my fault. My intro took forever. And that's 18 minutes, not counting the double recording.
I mean, we really just have Galen in here, so he's not recording more podcasts we have to try to keep up with. I mean, there's no truth to the rumor of that.
But I'm counting this as a podcast, guys. So.
Okay, well, that's fair. But I'll have already listened to it, so I won't feel like I'm behind, and I won't need to put other things aside to do it. So, all right, that's fine.
All right. So my plan for this segment is I'd love to dive into Tony Bennett and break him down, because I think he's interesting. I don't think people quite get why he would be such a good choice. Some people anyway. But there's some valid concerns that I'm, not quite seeing clearly. So I think he'd be interesting. And then third segment, maybe we reveal our top 5s. And then we can kind of debate wherever there are differences. Okay. Andy, I'm pretty sure you're Donovan Bennett 1-2, right?
Yes.
Andy, where do you fall?
I think the more I've looked at Bennett, the more I would probably do it the same way.
Actually, no. I'm not Donovan Bennett 1-2. But
okay.
So
okay, suspense.
I'm not going to say who it is, but I'm not Donovan Bennett 1-2.
Interesting. All right. Okay. All right. I'm excited to get to segment 3 now, so that we can find out who it is. Okay. So 18 minutes. So we'll shoot for this segment to probably be about 10, 12 minutes. And Galen, do you see the chat in the Hangout window, right?
I keep firing stuff in there, trying to keep the people entertained.
No, I mean our chat, our private chat.
No, I don't
see window.
The chat.
Open that up, because sometimes I'll put the time in there just so we can kind of keep track. It'll be more important for the later segments.
I got you. Okay, we're good.
All right, so let's talk Tony Bennett. Andy, I'm going to come to you first on Bennett, if that's cool.
Okay.
All right.
Yep. That's
okay.
Fine.
Excellent. All right. Let's make sure that we're recording, and then we'll hop right into this. All right, here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call presented by HoosierProud.com. I'm Jared Morris here talking IU hoops, specifically the IU coaching search with Andy Bottoms and our special guest this week, Galen Clavio of Crimson Cast. So, gentlemen, we spent the last segment talking about Billy Donovan. How realistic is that, and just how great of a hire he would be. I wrote on Assembly Call on Thursday in my 3-point shot article that, to me, Billy Donovan is the Grand Slam hire. There's no question. But, the number 2 on my list, and this is, with the understanding that, Brad Stevens isn't possible. I've seen nothing to indicate that Sean Miller or Greg Marshall are possible candidates. So this is just going off of people that we generally assume that there may be mutual interest in. Like, we haven't ruled these people out. To me, Tony Bennett is the clear number 2 on the list. And I know that there are concerns with his offensive system. Ryan has described that numerous times on the show. But when I look at his consistency, his success, winning 2 outright ACC titles, winning 30 games back-to-back years, at least 29 games in 3 straight years before this one, his defensive prowess, he's made it to an Elite 8. I understand that there are some concerns with the offense and with the pace, but I just think when you look at the consistency and you try to picture what he could do at an actual basketball school that really cares, I really think that he's a home run hire that I would be really excited about. And I know some people, feel the same, but some people also feel differently about that. What insight, Andy, can you give us about Tony Bennett that maybe might help people who are on the fence about him or really concerned about the offensive production that might help them, kind of see the light on a potential Tony Bennett hire?
Well, I mean, the one thing I would say, so before we get to the offensive piece, I mean, on the defensive side, again, you can consider this recency bias in terms of what we've watched from a defensive perspective the last few years, but in the last, I'm just looking at his coaching resume on KenPom. So there's 11 years on there. He's been in the top 25 in adjusted defensive efficiency in 9 of those 11 years, and been inside the top 20 in 8 of those. And that includes stints at Washington State where they were a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, and then really took a little bit to get things rolling at Virginia, but he's, 6 straight years of winning records in the ACC after inheriting a program that really wasn't very strong at all. And I think I kind of use that to segue a little bit into the offensive side of things. I mean, we could debate what Virginia's ranking is in the ACC pecking order, but it's probably at best 5th, which is probably even too strong. If you figure North Carolina, Duke, Louisville, Syracuse, from a program perspective, I would say would all be above it. Maybe there are others that you guys would say would be there as well. So at best, it's the 5th best program there, and he's been able to sustain success. And I do think some of the concerns are valid in terms of, if we want to look at tournament success and all those kinds of things as we, look forward there. And that was a point of contention with Crean. And certainly an issue that Bennett has had, and obviously coming off of a performance where they scored 39 points, perhaps not the ideal time to defend him from an offensive perspective. But I think you look a little bit at what Wisconsin was able to do a couple years ago. They really got some high-level guys in. They got a Sam Decker in, who was, the kind of, athlete and player that they had struggled to get at times, surrounded him with some other good pieces that were maybe a little bit better than people thought. And while the system of the slow down play and things like that does, increase your potential for variance and losing close games, okay, that can happen. But I think if you get a certain level of talent, you're able to overcome that. Those Wisconsin teams were, unfortunately, not enough in the final that would have allowed me to win an NCAA tournament pool, but I'm not bitter about that at all. But I think if you start to, spin that forward to, if you think at best that's the 5th best ACC program, you get him to a place like IU, which again, from a resource perspective, can he get a different level of guy than what he's gotten before? And what might he then be able to do to tweak a little bit of his approach to take advantage of that versus some of what he's, done in certain situations before is, okay, this is my best chance to win. Not saying all of a sudden he's going to be, early 90s UNLV. But I think there's probably some reason to believe that as a basketball tactician, he would be able to do potentially some different things and some even better things with a higher quality of recruit than what he's what he's had at Virginia.
And Galen, I want to talk about the offense a little bit, because I think there's a misconception. People look at the pace, they look at the points per game, and they equate that to not great production, but they've actually been a pretty efficient offense. Like, I think before this year, they were in the 50s. The 3 years before that, they were in the 20s, I believe, in adjusted offensive efficiency, which is really good. I mean, that's better than what Indiana was from an efficiency perspective this year. And the thing that I was really impressed by is, especially over the last 4 years, they've really gone out and challenged themselves in the non-conference. They've had a non-conference strength of schedule. I believe the lowest was 80, in the 40s and the 50s. And so those efficiency numbers are not empty numbers, based on gobbling up cupcakes in the non-conference schedule. And so I think the offense, it's slow, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, because it's been pretty efficient. And that's an important distinction.
There's a lot of paceism going on in this Tony Bennett discussion, frankly, and it disgusts me, and I think we should be better than that. I mean, look, first of all, I really think we need to get back to this idea of the fact that he has taken Washington State, which is at best the Penn State of the Pac-12, to a 4 seed and a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. He recruited Klay Thompson. He goes to Virginia, which had not exactly lit the world on fire the last 3 decades or so of ACC play, and has gotten them to the point where they've won ACC regular season titles, they've won ACC tournament titles, they've been a 1 seed, they've been a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. I mean, this is not an easy thing to do, and I think people misinterpret Bennett's system as, oh, he's just going to play that way offensively when he goes to IU because that's just the way he does it. Smart coaches adjust their systems to the talent that they have at their disposal. And I think what you see from Bennett is a system that is tailored to the sorts of talent he can bring into Virginia, which is not North Carolina or Duke or Indiana level talent from a potential perspective. It's much lower down on the food chain. They have much higher academic standards than those schools. So, or at least North Carolina and Indiana. So when I look at Bennett, when I look at the offense, you're right. It's not a bad offense. It is slow. I don't think it will be as slow. And I think Bennett, with access to what Indiana has in terms of recruiting footprint and in terms of resources, is going to have a more dynamic offense because he's going to have more dynamic players. And he's a smart enough coach to be able to take full advantage of that, not, try to pound them into this small box. I mean, people bring up Tony Bennett, his dad, Dick Bennett, who was his dad who coached at Wisconsin, as an example. Wisconsin's not Indiana. I mean, the sorts of players that you can get at Wisconsin, we saw that with Bo Ryan for many years, where they could only get a certain type of player. They got a better type of player towards the end of Ryan's tenure, and they almost won a national title, and they went to the Final Four the year before that. So, I really think people need to look at the baseline stuff, which is the amazing defenses teams play, the amazing efficiency that they play with on offense in many years, the lack of turnovers. That's a tremendous set of building blocks for your team to utilize. And that's what really, if we're looking at Bennett as a potential IU coaching candidate, it's what makes me so excited about that possibility.
But what is this basketball with defense and turnovers and without turnovers that you speak of?
Yes, I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds enjoyable. I'm not sure. I think it's one of those things though where like everybody wants to say, oh, this is ugly basketball or this brand of basketball isn't great. I view it much in the same way that people want to talk about, oh, it needs to be an IU guy or they need to be, a team needs to be full of, kids from Indiana. The reality is that if the winning comes, that stuff takes a back seat. And so, I mean, you're telling me that at some point, okay, we just won, 25, 26 games, but you know what? I didn't enjoy those wins because I didn't like I thought we played too slow. Like, those people need to find something different to complain about if that's where this is going to take us.
You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Galen Clavio, and we're breaking down the IU coaching search, spending some time this segment talking about Tony Bennett. One of the other concerns that people have had is he going to be able to recruit Indiana? I've had many people ask me that on Twitter. Well, he just pulled the 2016 Indiana Mr. Basketball Kyle Guy last year. So he's shown that he can do that. His sister was fired from Indiana back in the mid-2000s, I believe. And so people have wondered if a lingering grudge will prevent him. And now, they've had 3 transfers in the past couple of days, and people are concerned that maybe people are transferring too much out of his program. And I guess, the one thing that we don't really know, I suppose, is Tony Bennett really interested? Because, we think that he is. It seems reasonable. But that's another one that, I've actually heard more chatter about Billy Donovan than I have Tony Bennett. I think people just kind of assume that he would be because it's a great job and it would be a step up, but we don't really know yet. The point I've been making is that we should be very excited if he is the choice. His team's 39-point output in the NCAA tournament notwithstanding. Is there anything else, Galen, that the general conversation on Tony Bennett is missing?
I just want to say this. A lot of people, Gerb in the chat, and several other people pointed this out, have talked about, score 39 points in that Florida game. That's not an efficient offense. The one thing that everybody lauded Tom Crean's Indiana offenses on was being good and efficient and so forth. Yet in the NCAA tournament in 2013 with 2 top 4 draft picks, IU scored 58 points in a 62 possession game against Temple and 50 points in a 65 possession game against Syracuse. My point being, you're going to have bad games sometimes offensively, and that's not an indictment of your system as a whole. And if Tom Crean's offenses, which have always been very good, can occasionally have bad games like that, certainly a team like Virginia could as well. I think overall, from the standpoint of whether Bennett's interested or not, I think he would have to be. Now, is he interested enough to want to leave what's a pretty good situation at Virginia? It's hard to say, but I have to think that a guy like Bennett, who has his own particular approach to doing basketball, he's going to want to know internally, can I make this, the way that I think about basketball and coaching basketball work at the highest level? Most ambitious college basketball coaches think that way. So I think he would certainly listen to IU if they came calling.
Yeah, as Brian mentions in our chat, it was Rick Greenspan who fired Kathy Bennett, and I've heard that wouldn't be a huge issue, but again, we don't know. So just some questions there. We'll have to see. So I know for me, it's Billy Donovan 1, it's Tony Bennett 2, and in the next segment, we're going to reveal our current top 5 list. Andy, are you Donovan 1, Bennett 2? Is that where you're at?
Yeah, I think I'd put myself in that camp at this point. I think I was less sure of Bennett, but he's a guy that kind of, as the longer this has played out and the more that I think everybody has gone over and over these candidates to try to think about it, I think he's one that's risen a bit up my list. So I would say he is at number 2 for me.
And Galen, I'm pretty sure that you're number 1 on Donovan, but there is now some message board chatter, some Twitter DMs that you might actually have a different number 2 than Tony Bennett. The rumors are flying. So there's smoke there. Is there fire? Do you have a different number 2 than Tony Bennett?
The house is burning, Jared. It's burning right now.
All right, so we're going to find out who Galen has number 2 coming up on Assembly Call Radio. That will be in our next segment. We'll reveal our top 5s. We'll talk about why Galen doesn't have Tony Bennett number 2, and then we'll talk about whatever debates come from our top 5s and where we have differences. That's on Assembly Call coming up. Stick with us. Excellent. That segment was 12:58.
Cool.
So let me just put this in here so we know where we're at. So 12:58. So we're at 31:10. So we've got 18 minutes and 15 seconds for the final 2 segments. So probably what we'll do is this one will go longer, and we'll probably just save 4 or 5 minutes for the final segment and wrap it up somehow. Maybe we'll all tell stories about Ryan while he's not here to defend himself.
Seems like a good
idea.
idea.
That's what we usually do. Or if you guys want to let us know in the chat something that you want us to tackle in the last 5 minutes, or we'll just pick up where this segment leaves off. Okay, so you guys all have top 5s. Man, it's hard finalizing.
You had like a
top
top 7 yesterday.
I know, but
clearly you can whittle it down.
Andy, fluid situation, man. Fluid situation.
It is fluid.
Okay.
You're right.
By the way, if anybody ever starts a podcast that just analyzes coaching carousels, like off-season coaching carousels, call it fluid situation.
There is a Twitter account called Coaching Carousel.
Is there?
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's okay. He does a decent job.
I wonder, let me ask you guys this real quick. Is Alford in your top 5?
Nope.
Okay,
No.
He's not in mine. So let's maybe we can just talk about this real quick to the YouTube folks before because we may not even get into him on the radio show then.
Can I just I'd love to do that. I'm not trying to take over the show. I think we need to mention it if he's not in our top 5 because he's literally in everybody else's top 2 in the IU radio sphere.
Yeah, I think that can be a
let's
talking point, even if that's what we touched on in the very last segment, where you can do something to the effect of, hey, one guy who wasn't in anybody's top 5 or whatever.
Let's do that.
Yeah,
let's do that.
It's worth,
let's end.
I do think it's worth mentioning.
I don't want to like over talk about it because we've talked about it on this show a lot. So let's save it for the final segment. I think that's good. Okay,
get Dan Dockich on to debate that with us.
Oh yes, please. Absolutely.
Seriously, we need to have Dockich and Ryan debate that and just go back and forth.
Just Ryan's email about it the other day. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
So it's probably good he's not on to discuss this. We could just eat up the last 18 minutes of a show with him ranting for 18 minutes about Steve Alford.
Yes. All right. So let's do this. I will. Galen, I'll come to you first since we teased yours, and then we'll go to Andy, and then I'll reveal mine after that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
That works.
Excellent. So we're going to shoot for about 13 minutes or so for this segment. Okay. Let's do this. You're listening to the Assembly Call presented by HoosierProud.com, where they offer a line of t-shirts and accessories that are unmatched for anyone who wants a unique, stylish way to display their pride in being a Hoosier. Check them out at HoosierProud.com and use the promo code AC for 15% off your entire order. I'm Jared Morris, talking IU basketball with my co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Well, one of my co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU postgame show, Andy Bottoms, and then our special guest, Galen Clavio from Crimson Cast, who's joining us on this episode to talk about the IU coaching search. And you can, of course, join us on the Assembly Call after every IU basketball game over at assemblycall.com and every Friday right here for Assembly Call Radio. So we teased in our last segment our top 5 lists, and Galen, we specifically teased a surprise number 2 because I always thought that you were a Donovan Bennett 1-2 guy, but apparently that has changed. So here we go. Let's find out what your top 5 is.
Well, so it hasn't changed. I've woken up. I've woken up to Bennett, but Bennett's never been really in my top 2. So I'll give you it from 5 to 1.
And to clarify, this is in order of preference, not in order of what we think is likely to happen.
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Yeah. So in order of preference, my number 5 is actually now Chris Collins. I think Chris Collins, kind of an under the radar name for whatever reason, but I think he's done some awesome things. I think he's got a lot of potential. My number 4 at this point is Chris Holtman from Butler. Similar thing there with him as you have with Collins. My number 3 is Bennett. We know my number 1 is Donovan. My number 2 is Sean Miller. And this is a name that it's weird because Miller should be a name that we're talking about a lot more. And when this whole thing got started, it's like everybody just stopped talking about Sean Miller. I think there was some early rumor that, he's not interested in the job, whatever. But who knows who's interested in the job? Like, nobody's come out and said, I really want that Indiana job, so far in this process. I think Miller is a little more of a complete package for what IU is looking for right now than even Bennett is. He's had obviously tremendous success at Arizona. He had a lot of success at Xavier. We know he was interested in the job the last time it was open. The question, he plays a really fun style of ball. They're good offensively and defensively. He's probably one of the top 5 recruiters in the country at this point. I don't think it's a pie in the sky thing. I don't think it's something where, we should be thinking, he would never be interested in coming here. I think that there's a lot of appeal to him. To coming to, back to the Midwest. He's from Pennsylvania. He played at Pitt. Arizona's an excellent job. You're always recruiting in UCLA's backyard. You have no local recruiting to speak of. There's a lot of built-in advantages at IU from a resource perspective, from a recruiting perspective. And if you're thinking of paying Billy Donovan, $7 million a year or whatever it would be, whatever the contract would be on that, I mean, paying Sean Miller $6 million a year doesn't seem like a bad bet either. The guys had a lot of success in the NCAA tournament. They could very easily end up in the Final Four this year. I think he would kill it here at IU, which is why, I think Bennett would too, but I like Miller's style of ball slightly more.
See, I always had Miller as my number 2, and I just heard no chatter about him, so I've kind of stopped thinking about him. But
it's always the people that you never hear about. It's like the stealth candidate that comes in at the last second. That's one of the reasons why I've kind of got hope on this, Jared.
I know. Maybe I should go back and listen to my own intro to this very show and remind myself of that very thing. Andy, your top 5.
Yeah, I think just to go back to the Sean Miller thing, that's interesting because he's not in mind for kind of the same reason you just said, because it's kind of been out of my mind, but I know he's a guy that I had initially, when we talked about this a while ago, thrown out. But I won't change now. But if I thought about that more and really considered him to be on the table, he would be right up there in the top 3 for sure. All right, so my number 5, I'm gonna throw out Dane Fife. I think it's unlikely and a little bit crazy, but I do think it's. I don't know. It would be interesting, and maybe that's why I want to see it. I don't really know. I think you have the chance. It's a high risk, high reward type of move, and while you don't want to screw it up, I also would say, if it turns out after a few years it's not the right thing to do, then maybe you just have to admit that and move on. So I don't know. I'm going to throw him in there. I think I wanted to make sure that we talked about him because I think he's an interesting candidate. 4, I would probably say Holtman. Again, not sure how likely that is, but I think he's, what he did even at Gardner-Webb, a program that wasn't very successful, I think is interesting. And he certainly picked things up from Butler and done really well, knows the state from that standpoint, and has done a good job of getting guys there. And so I think he's good. Whether he's interested, whether he personality wise is a fit for it, I don't know. I also remembered hearing kind of where they have the coach mic'd up, where he was complaining about fouls to his team. I respected that quite a bit, knowing that would be on there. He's like, oh, I can't believe it. They only have 2 fouls or whatever it was. So I enjoyed that. And I'm going to say Archie Miller. So I'll stay in the Miller family, but he's a guy that I've kind of mentioned. I think most times we've had this discussion on the show. The fear there is potentially that he's holding out for the Ohio State job. We're comfortable with. Who knows how long Mata is going to be there. I know they've said he'll be back next year, but does he, kind of ride it out and have a good thing at Dayton and be there? But I think as we talk a little bit about with Bennett, how he's been able to adjust to personnel he's had in the situation. And I think I've touched on that before with Miller, where he's, kind of taken teams that were really shorthanded, done some good things, played slightly different styles depending on his personnel. And I think he's been able to adapt in season really well to, issues or things that have come up with his team. So I'll say those 5. But it's not necessarily easy to make a top 5 list. Perhaps that's just because of the number of names that have been thrown around.
It is. You're listening to the Assembly Call presented by HoosierProud.com. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Galen Clavio. We are revealing our current top 5 in order of preference for the IU coaching position. I've already said that Billy Donovan is number 1. Tony Bennett is number 2. I've always had Sean Miller on that list, but took him off when I didn't really hear much about him. So you could slide him probably in right there at number 3. And then if we go in reverse order with the rest, I've got Dane Fife at number 5 for the same reasons that Andy mentioned. It is high risk, high reward, but I think his time at Fort Wayne, while the record numbers don't look overly impressive, the progress that he made there was impressive. And he did that in his mid-20s, which is incredibly impressive. And also impressive is having the humility to step back and realize I need to go learn more and to spend some time learning under Tom Izzo. I really appreciate that. And I think part of it is I just have a tremendous sense of FOMO with Dane Fife, fear of missing out, if you're not familiar with that term. He, to me, seems like the guy that could be a next great coach in college basketball. And he's young and he's unproven. And obviously you'd be taking a chance on him. And, it would make me a little bit uncomfortable. It would be scary, but sometimes you got to go bold to get the biggest rewards. And I think you'd have to really sit down and talk with him and really believe that he's the guy. But if he is, I wouldn't want Fred Glass to be scared off by the lack of experience or his youth, because I think this is a time to go bold. So he's my number 5. Number 4 is Chris Mack from Xavier. Kind of heard some things recently that suggest he's maybe not as much of a candidate as I thought he was. And there may be some recency bias here because I was impressed, that he was able to kind of keep that team together after dealing with some injuries this year because some other programs were really derailed by injuries and weren't able to overcome them and constantly use them as an excuse. And so that was somewhat refreshing. Also refreshing to see Sean Miller do that as well. And my number 3, and this is a new entrant, is Chris Collins. I didn't think there was much of a chance for him, especially when I read that SI article and he was, Tom Green talked about how he texted him and had some nice things to say to his son. And I was also worried that Duke would be his dream job. And I don't want Indiana to be a stepping stone job, which is kind of my fear with Archie Miller. But when I look at Chris Collins coming from a coaching background, he actually seems to me like a guy probably smart enough to know that he shouldn't be the guy to follow Coach K at Duke and may not want that pressure. And maybe that isn't a dream job. And if he can get a job like Indiana and he's from the Midwest, maybe he could settle in real nicely. And I mean, the guy got Northwestern to the tournament, which is unbelievably impressive. So he's a guy that the more I've looked at the resume, the more I've liked. And again, it truly is a fluid situation with these guys because I think a lot of us are, learning some new things about them as we go through. Okay, so what I think probably the first place to go, obviously Andy and I both had Dane Fife. Galen, are you anti-Fife, or was he just not quite enough to get into your top 5, but you're not anti him?
I've gone back and forth on Fife a lot. I think where I'm at right now, and I was talking about this on the Great Lost podcast I recorded with Tony Adrania and Andy Witchery earlier today, is here's the thing. IU right now is not in position to take a risk on hiring Dane Fife. I think like when North Carolina hired Matt Doherty, it was a risk because you didn't know for sure if this guy who, had coached at Notre Dame for a year and had been a Roy Williams assistant, you didn't know if he was going to make it or not, but you had a mulligan that you could take there if you were North Carolina. And if it worked out, you've got a coach for maybe the next 30 years. It didn't work out. We don't really have that option right now with Dane Fife. We're in a position where ultimately, if this fails, we're in a lot of trouble. And I would hate for that sort of pressure to be on a guy who's got his first kind of big boy job. I just think there's other better candidates. I think, you mentioned Collins. I mentioned Collins. I don't know how you would explain why Fife was a superior choice to Collins, given Collins' background as an assistant and given the fact, as you mentioned, he's already taken Northwestern to the tournament, which nobody seemed to be able to do for the last, 80 years or so.
Yeah, and I will say the hard thing with Fife to know, and I've really tried to analyze this myself, is am I giving him extra credit for being an IU guy? Is there some cognitive bias at play there? There may be. I try to look at it as objectively as possible, but I agree with what you're saying, and that's why I think it's not going to happen. I don't think there's much of a chance of it happening because this probably isn't. I think from Fred Glass's perspective, he's not going to view this as the time to take a chance. It's the time to go run the gauntlet that he laid out. And so that's why I kind of think that's what will happen. But let's talk Collins, because he's quickly rising for me, especially now that I think there's actually a chance that may happen. You mentioned him. Andy, you didn't have him on your list. Anything against him or your thoughts on Chris Collins?
I just don't like that he went to Duke. No, I'm just kidding. I think, I guess in my head, both because it would be an intra-conference, transfer situation, whatever you want to call it, which is fairly unheard of. I guess I don't know that I've truly considered how reasonable of a, I guess not how reasonable, how feasible of a candidate he really was. I mean, obviously, certainly what he's been able to do from a Northwestern standpoint is admirable, and he's done a really good job of being able to, recruiting there is certainly on the uptick. The quality of play is obviously better. And so I think based on accomplishment, it makes sense. I struggle to think that it's feasible. So that's one of these that's hard where we're saying it's an order of preference, but I'm, not including Sean Miller because I'm not sure that it's really feasible, and probably would say the same thing about Collins. The other thing with him is, does he really want to end up in the NBA at some point like his dad? And is that really an option? So maybe IU isn't the stepping stone to Duke, but maybe it's a stepping stone to the NBA. But flip side of that is, in any of these kinds of stepping stone scenarios, it's like, well, look, if they do well enough at IU to be able to, we make the same argument with football, with people leaving. Like, well, somebody's going to want to leave. Well, it's not a bad thing if they do well enough at IU to be able to say, hey, you're now qualified to do something better. So in that regard, maybe that shouldn't be a disqualifier for people who are thinking that way about him, or really any of the candidates for that matter.
There was one name who was conspicuously absent from all of our lists. We're going to mention that name and talk about why he wasn't on there coming up on the assembly call in our final segment. Stick with us. I think you probably know what that name is. All right. That was...
How long have they been looking at this review in this Gonzaga-West Virginia game? God.
It's amazing. I mean, it's been...
Just make a call.
And Ted Valentine isn't even involved in this.
Oh, my.
Yeah. I mean, if you've looked at it that long and you can't tell, then just go with the call that you made on the court. I mean... It's stunning to me how long they've been over there. Not to mention the fact they missed him get shoved in the back, I'm pretty sure, before he lost the ball, but that's neither here nor there.
All right, so we have 5 minutes and 40 seconds for this segment. So I need to start the outro at 5 minutes and 4 seconds. So, Galen, this is one where we just have to watch the time a little bit because we got to be really specific with when we get out. So I'll give some updates over here in the chat. And then, so let's talk Alford in the next segment. Is there real quick, anyone else that didn't make either of your lists that you feel still could be kind of a dark horse candidate to actually get the job, or that, that still is kind of intriguing to you?
I mean, certainly Archie Miller for me. And oh God. At this point, I think that's about, he would be the only one that I didn't mention in the top 5 who I think Alford still technically has a chance, but that would be about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say the same thing. I think anybody else I would have thought of, one of you guys mentioned. So we talked about it in some form or fashion.
Like the Mike Whites and all those people, they're not really.
I mean, I wish we had more time. I'd love to go in on the Mike White to IU crowd a little bit. I mean,
well, what are your general thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, he's
interesting.
He's like the girl that just moved to town. Like he's nice enough, but he's been to one tournament so far. One. And I mean, Florida's playing well, but he's been to one tournament. And I just don't think there's I have a hard time.
Hey, he held Tony Bennett's team to 39 points. So what do you think about that?
I have a hard time. Okay, screw you. I have a hard time saying why. A lot of these guys, it's like, okay, you wouldn't hire Holtman, but you'd hire Mike White. Like, what would be the possible explanation why Mike White would be a better choice than Chris Holtman? Like, not just that. Oh, Holtman's been to multiple tournaments. He's also from Indiana, and he's done things at two different schools. I mean, there's. Yeah, so that's kind of where White is for me. I mean, I think he's intriguing, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about the Larry Brown on staff? I know you alluded to that earlier.
No,
Good Lord, that would be the end.
No, Rab Johns explained like how that whole rumor came about, and it was just like a conversation like on the phone with an NBA person. It wasn't even like it was just kind of ridiculous how that whole thing came about. Okay, what would the reaction be if Mike Woodson with Larry Brown as top assistant were introduced at a press conference as coach? Like, can we for a moment imagine what that reality would?
If your options were that, Alford or rehire Tom Crean, what do you choose?
Wait, what was it? What was it again?
It was the Woodson, Larry Brown, Alford, or rehire Crean.
Actually, I would 100%. 100% of the time I'd go with the Woodson Larry Brown thing, just because that's like a reality television show waiting to happen. Like the entertainment factor of that would be stellar. I don't know how you could turn that down.
It's an interesting point. All right, so we got 5 minutes and 40 seconds for this one. So we need to get out about 5:04. So let's do this. And Galen, I'll come to you first on Alford.
Okay.
Big time.
Okay.
Big time onions on that shot for Gonzaga. Holy moly.
Wow.
Okay. All right, let's start this.
All right.
You're listening to the Assembly Call presented by HoosierProud.com. I'm Jared Morris here, wrapping up with Andy Bottoms and Galen Clavio. And guys, there was one name conspicuously absent from all of our top 5 lists, and it's a name that has been rumored in a lot of circles to be maybe in the lead for this job. And the guy some people assume is going to get it, Steve Alford. So, Galen, why did he not make your list in terms of preference? And do you still think there's a legitimate chance of this happening?
There's still a legitimate chance it happens because there are people that are advocating for Alford, but I think there's 2 primary reasons why it won't. One, look, the Pierre Pierce situation at Iowa still looms very large. It was an ugly situation that never fully got explained or apologized for. And frankly, I have a hard time seeing this IU administration, which is very concerned with its public image, which has had Title IX problems, both, certainly outside of athletics, being willing to take a guy who's going to automatically engender thousands of angry phone calls and letters about his hiring. You might be able, as sad as this commentary is on college athletics, you might be able to excuse it if the guy was a stellar coach with an exemplary resume, and he doesn't have that on his resume. He's been a slightly above replacement level coach throughout the course of his career. He's got a very good team at UCLA this year, but I just don't think that he's done enough on the court or off the court to warrant being ahead of many of the other candidates that are out there who have done more in both of those areas, to be considered legitimate candidates for this job.
Andy, Ryan shouts so loudly about Steve Alford when we talk about him. I'm not sure anybody's heard what we think of Steve Alford. What are your thoughts about the Alford candidacy?
I mean, as far as the Pierce situation goes, I think we have at least touched on that, and I think what Galen said is absolutely correct. I think from a basketball perspective, it's kind of I'm going to selectively use the same argument that you made kind of against Fife a minute ago, but not apply it to Fife, but apply it to Alford. If he wasn't an IU guy, would he even be considered? And somebody with as long of a coaching career as he's had, 20 plus years, and the overall, again, if one of the knocks on Crean is you're not having success in the tournament, why would you take a guy who has had even less to replace him? And again, I think the IU guy part of it and the double check plus and all those kinds of things are why he's even in the conversation in spite of the Pierce situation, all those things. It just doesn't, to me, there's nothing that he's done from an actual like basketball coaching standpoint that suggests that it would be among the top candidates there. And even if you compare him to somebody like Fife, as we talked about, there's kind of an unknown of what he might be at this case. Like we know what Alford is as a coach at this point. And yeah, you could say that might get a little bit better with the resources at IU with, some of the history there, maybe, but he's got a pretty long track record enough to say, I have a good handle on what this guy is and is not as a basketball coach.
So it's a small sample size, and there's probably some selection bias at play here, but our recent comments in our chat, no on Steve Alford, no on Alford, no Alford here. I wrote a letter to the AD with my concerns this week about Steve Alford. It would be very hard for me to continue to root for IU basketball if he's named the coach. I have been surprised by how many people I have heard say that very sentiment, that it would be hard for them to continue supporting IU basketball if Steve Alford were named coach. Which is interesting. So, I mean, we're going to see, because it's a hot name. I tend to side with you, Galen, just about, the conservative nature of the administration and would they really want to bring that in? So we'll find out. We've got about a minute left. Any final thoughts? Take about 30 seconds each on the coaching search as we hopefully round into, the final sprint, but we have no idea. Galen?
This is fun. I love this. I know some people are stressed out by the coaching search, but I think this is awesome. I think it's cool that there's so many good candidates out there. There's so many different directions IU basketball could go in at this point. And, frankly, it's great for the podcasting business. The more that we can talk about this stuff, the better. So I hope that this goes on for a little while longer. I'm not worried about it. I figured this was going to take some time. And I think Fred Glass is doing his due diligence. I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with.
Andy?
Yeah, I think it's, again, I just feel like it reaffirms what so many of us believed, even though others in the media might tell you not to, in terms of what IU, is and isn't as a job. And I think ultimately the pool of candidates that's been discussed, while, yeah, we could have a dark horse come from outside of that. Ultimately, for me, obviously the Alford thing set aside, I feel like I could talk myself into getting excited about any of them. And I think that's a good place to be in. And I struggle to believe they're not going to get a really highly qualified and good candidate that people can rally behind.
Absolutely. Well, that will do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. Make sure you join us at assemblycall.com/live every Thursday night for our live simulcast of our Assembly Call radio recording, or you can subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. Our thanks to Hoosier Proud for sponsoring this episode. Go to HoosierProud.com and use the promo code AC for 15% off. And thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. Beautiful.
Well, that final possession from West Virginia could have gone a little bit better.
Who wore it worse, West Virginia or Michigan?
Well, West Virginia they had a lot more cracks at it, where they just kept taking multiple.
They 25 multiple basket for last 15 seconds. That was terrible.
I know. After taking two terribly contested threes that they somehow got the rebound off of, and then it was like, oh, well, we should really go to the well on this a third time, but from further away and with less of an idea of what we're actually going to do.
Man.
Oh,
Incredible.
Boy. Yeah, that was something.
All right. Well, hey, thank you to everybody watching on YouTube. Number one, for being here. Number two, for dealing with the glitch at the beginning, the lack of alignment leading me to not pressing the record button. Just, what are we going to do? I promise we will get these kinks worked out and it'll be a lot smoother as we move forward. But feel free to give us feedback, especially on YouTube. Like if you like this format, if you'd prefer that we just do the recording, off on the side and try and do something special for YouTube. Like we really, we think this is a fun way to do it and engage everybody and get the chat going too. But we want to make it obviously as good for you as possible. We know there's a lot of you who watch solely on YouTube. So do let us know if you have any thoughts there. But
can I give
fun recording?
I want to give the people who have stuck around a couple of nuggets of insider information if I can.
Oh yeah. We love insider information. We are still live on YouTube.
So for those who have stuck around, from what I've heard, the Alford thing is a non-starter. I don't think that that's going anywhere. From like multiple sources, it sounds like somebody, and I don't know whether it was Alford's people. The stealth answer is it was actually IU people doing this, have flooded the airwaves with the Alford stuff as a diversion of some sorts. But the Alford camp does not seem to think that they're going to get a contract offer from IU. So I would not worry as much about that. It's still possible. I mean, things can change, but I wouldn't worry as much about that. I do think the Donovan thing has some legs. I don't know how many legs it's got, but I think it's got some legs. And I think all this Chris Mack stuff that's come out over the course of the last 24 hours is highly suspicious at best. Again, just based upon some information that I've run across from talking to people so far in this. So that's just some stuff to think about over the course of the next couple of days.
Interesting. I've heard some similar things on Alford, so that kind of matches. Beautiful. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Where are we at with this Purdue-Kansas game, by the way? I don't have a TV in here.
Kansas is up 2 with under 4 timeout.
Purdue was leading for a while, and they're not now. So, yeah.
Oh, very nice. Cool.
So
hey,
good.
Galen, do you have any more podcasts coming out?
Well, we had one. We were supposed to do a coaching search one today. We recorded an hour and some minutes of it, and it just the first 5 minutes recorded great, and then it just stopped recording altogether. So that was
the complete inverse of this show.
Yeah, but we're gonna. That's right. I'm gonna try to re-record that in stages tomorrow, and then Scott and I will certainly have one on Sunday. Resetting things, because I don't think we're going to have a hire by that point yet. It looks like we're going to have another weekend of pondering what's going on.
Do we think if the Donovan
a lot
thing
of open
happens,
houses on the real estate market in Bloomington over the weekend, so you really can't. Yeah,
I'm going to go to all of them, see if Christine Donovan is there.
One of them. Yes.
If the Donovan thing happens, do we think that they would try to wait until after his season? Like, would they try and keep it quiet all the way until then? And maybe like. But if they came to an agreement, would they try and tell the players to say like, "Hey, maybe you want to hang around"?
Well,
like how would that work in reality?
The wildest of conspiracy theories is that that's already happened, and that the players know about that. Now, I don't know if I totally buy that, but no, I think that there has to be some kind of acknowledgement. They have to have some kind of staff in place if they're going to wait that long. I think honestly, if there's a barrier to this, it's this idea that Donovan, what happens if the Thunder go into what happens if they get to the conference finals? Like that's a tough thing to get around. They got to have somebody on the ground.
And he's had cold feet before, for a job.
He has. He has. That's true. Although that's the big question: is this a ploy to get a contract extension so that he's got a bigger buyout if they try to fire him, or is this like a legitimate thing where he wants to come back? I mean, depending on what sources you want to believe, he's had interest in this job before. He's called people in relation to this job already. So this isn't just some kind of an idle, flirtation with IU basketball. But look, I think as has become the joke on one of the message boards, it's a very fluid situation, and it's going to remain that way. I mean, I think right now everything's on the table. I think Donovan's on the table. I think Bennett's on the table. I think Sean Miller's still on the table, and I think that there's some players in reserve who would still be excellent coaches. And at the end of the day, if they want Billy Donovan, they can wait, because if they don't get him, Tony Bennett's not going anywhere. Sean Miller's not going anywhere. Chris Holtman's not going anywhere. They're going to be able to kind of wait those guys out. And if they don't, they'll still have a nice backup plan.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of hoping it just keeps going, because the longer it goes, the more I think that it's, the Donovan thing could be it. So, Andy, did you have something before we wrap up here?
No, I don't think so. It was probably something sarcastic. So, no, we're good.
Do we root for Kansas or Purdue in this game?
Kansas.
I can't root for Purdue.
Isn't the true thing to do to root for Purdue and then
no, this isn't the SEC. We're not going to start chanting.
No, wait, no, Andy, isn't the true thing is to root for Purdue and then have them lose to Oregon in the Elite Eight?
Oh boy,
because I mean, isn't that the more crushing loss?
I like it. It's diabolical, but I like it.
Yeah, no, I'd prefer they just not even get that far.
Fair enough.
Just take them out right now. All right, everybody. Galen, thanks again for coming on,
guys.
especially on short notice. We appreciate it. We need to do this more often.
Hey,
We're gonna try and do some more rotating.
you know what? The Crean shackles are off, so I'm ready to podcast anytime now.
Yeah. All righty. Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We will certainly see you next Thursday, unless some kind of crazy news breaks between now and then we'll try and get a show put together as quickly as we possibly can. So until then, we'll talk to y'all soon.